Welcome back, fourth grade friends, to Why the Sea is Salty. So, yesterday, what I had you guys do is I really wanted you guys to think about how setting is such an important element of storytelling. And it's such an important element of your stories as you get older because the setting is really what grounds your characters. And in some ways, your setting is actually what drives some of the problems in your stories. Sometimes people are looking for a home and they don't have a setting. Other times, their setting is changing because of weather and the setting becomes a character because it becomes a dangerous place for them. So, setting really can play a key element in storytelling, and it really can be that element that helps you visualize and ground your characters. We learned yesterday that when we were younger, we just had to remember that setting was where and when. Well, now we know fourth graders as big time readers, we want to make sure that we know that setting is also visualizing the story. How well can you describe your setting? How well can you look for those elements inside your storytelling? So, today we're going to use details and examples to talk about our text. We've done this before, but it's going to look just slightly different today. So, we're going to use details and examples from the dialogue and text description in Why the Sea is Salty. And we're going to really start to think about what lessons or themes are we supposed to start learning in this story. They're starting to sneak in there. And so as we develop more of like what's going to be the problem in this story, we're going to find out that there's going to be some lessons that our characters are meant to learn. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how readers use details and examples to talk about the text. So here's some things that we might want to remember. How do readers identify themes in literary text? Again, theme is a lesson, and we're going to really start to bring that around in the next couple of days. So really pay attention to that word theme. And then we want to make sure that we remember that readers understand that themes in literary text can be interpreted from dialogue and description. So we're going to pay very close attention to what our characters say and what our characters do. That's really going to start to show us where our theme is. Today, you're going to find some words in your reading that you may or may not be familiar with. Seasick, it's a word for when you're in a boat or you're out on the ocean and the motion of the boat or the waves can actually make your stomach a little bit queasy. Funny story, Mrs. Green actually gets a little bit seasick in big boats or even on sailboats. And then the other word is squid. And there's a picture of the squid right below there. It's a marine animal. It's kind of similar to an octopus, but it uses jet propulsion to move it in the ocean. And really, squid is a super important part of the appetite of the diet of the people who live in the Philippines. And so it's going to be a key element to this story. And again, we remember our giant really does like the squid and the food that the villagers are bringing to him when they come to get the salt. So, why the sea is salty. Good readers always reread the pages that they left off. So this is actually the last page we read the day before. It's so important for fourth grade readers that we go back and reread where we left off so it brings our brain back around to what we left off on the day before. So here's our review. The smell of the salt was so strong that it was hard to breathe in the cave. The villagers would try to fill baskets as quickly as they could so that they could get back into the fresh air. The giant always waited outside the cave when the people were getting salt. He knew how dangerous it was. If the people took too much salt from the bottom of the piles, they could cause a salt slide. They would be buried alive. He did not want anyone to get hurt while on his island. With their baskets filled with salt, the people would lift the heavy loads onto their heads and carry them down the steep path to their small boats on the shore. It was hard work, and usually only the strongest and the fittest of people were able to get the salt. Oops, sorry, fourth grade friends. The giant worried as he watched the people sail back to their island. The heavy loads of salt made their small boats sit so low in the water that they were in danger of sinking. So we know at this point in the story that setting is such an important character. Well, now we got to start to really think about what is the problem in our stories, because our stories have problems in them, and we really want to figure out how the setting impacts that problem. The storm. Chapter 3. One day the villagers who lived on an island close to the giant ran out of salt. Before the villagers could sail across the sea and get more, a storm blew in. The wild wind raced across the sea, and white foam caps danced on the tops of big waves. The houses on their bamboo poles shook as the wind roared through the village. There was nothing the villagers could do but wait for the storm to pass. Day after day they waited. The villagers did not like being without salt. They had no salt to put in their food to make it tastier. They had no salt to mix with water to bathe their wounds and kill germs. Who is brave enough to go and get some salt for us? The villagers asked. They listened to the roar of the wind. They looked at the big waves and were afraid. I know we need salt, but it's too dangerous to take the boats out yet, said the man, shaking his head. Wait until the storm passes. Then we can sail to the giant's island and get more salt. I just love this passage over here, fourth grade friends. Go over here to page 14. In the middle right there, it starts with the wild wind raced across the sea and white foam caps danced on top of the big waves. Can you guys picture that white foam on top of those waves? And then here's one of your vocabulary words that you had the other day, bamboo poles shook in the wind. So here are these bamboo poles and they're holding up this house. Man, bamboo must be awfully strong if it could hold a house up, but then also blow in the wind. And I think bamboo is also very bendable too. So the problem right now is the villagers are out of salt. What else are some key details that are telling us that in this story that the villagers are out of salt? What makes this a problem right now? And again, the setting has changed from being calm to being now in a storm. Please take me with you when you go, begged the man's young son. For years, the boy had wanted to go with his father to the giant's island and collect salt. The man looked down at his son. One day, I'll be an old man, he thought, and then it will be my son's turn to get the salt for our family. He smiled at the boy. Yes, you can come, he said. It's time you learned how to get the salt. Chapter 4. The Boy. At last, the worst of the storm passed. Just as promised, the boy was allowed to sail to the giant's island with his father and some other villagers. The boy was excited. He'd heard many stories about the giant and his cave. He wondered how many of those stories were really true. The sea was still rough, and the small boat rocked and rolled in the waves. It wasn't long before the boy was seasick. There must be an easier way to get salt than this, he groaned. If there were, we would have thought of it a long time ago, his father answered. The giant was waiting for them when they got to the island. He noticed the boy with his father. It had been a long time since he'd seen a child. Only adults ever came to get salt. The giant smiled at the boy, staring up at him with wide eyes. We've got no dried squid for you today, called one villager. We couldn't go fishing because of the storm. We don't have boiled rice mixed with prawns either, said another. The giant was disappointed. He'd been looking forward to the tasty food they usually brought with him. He watched the villagers get their bamboo baskets out of their boats. They set off for the cave in the hills. Watch your step, he called as they disappeared into the jungle. The path is slippery today. The giant got to the cave before the villagers did. The boy followed his father, though, through the cave opening and into a huge underground chamber. What is an underground chamber? That's a new word. When his eyes got used to the dim light, he could make out the great piles of salt his father had told him about. The smell was so awful he could hardly breathe. Fill your basket like this, he said. His father was crouching down at the bottom of one of the piles of salt. Make sure you don't cause a salt slide, though. The boy scooped up some salt with his bare hands and dropped it into the basket. He looked up at the pile of salt towering above him. I hope it doesn't slide down on top of me, he thought nervously. I'd be buried alive. Quickly, the boy crouched down and used his hands to scoop up salt like his father had shown him. He scooped and he scooped until both bamboo baskets were full. Then the boy and his father picked up the baskets. and balanced them on their heads and left the cave. The boy stood tall so he didn't spill any of the salt as they went back down the slippery path, but then he couldn't see where he was putting his feet. Several times they got tangled in vines and he stumbled. By the time they got back to the shore, his body was sore from carrying the heavy load. All right, so today we're going to be talking about problem. And again, the problem was that the villagers ran out of salt. And this problem was compounded by the fact that there was a storm that lasted days. It came in, and the wild wind caused such big waves. And again, the author did a great job describing those white caps foaming at the top, dancing up top there. And it was too dangerous to take the boats out. This is a way that setting can quickly become your problem when you're reading a story. Today, fourth grade friends, I want you again to remember that when we are reading a story, we start with that story mountain where we start to learn a little bit about who the characters are in the beginning and a little bit about the setting. But as we start to climb that mountain, we start to realize what the problem is. Today, fourth grade friends, I want you to make a web very similar to this, but I want you to do it with the book that you've been reading. Tell me a little bit about the problem and give me some details that make this problem worse or that build on this problem.